that way. I think in the interest of time, we will go ahead and get started. We are so glad to have you here today. We want to share with you the ABCs of refugee resettlement. And as we share this afternoon, we're going to cover three main points. We will talk about awareness, belonging, and community. And as I mentioned, we will have a bonus Q&A at the end of our time together so we can answer additional questions that you might have. So a little bit about who we are. We're here representing Lutheran Social Services of Wisconsin and Upper Michigan. Some of you may know our president and CEO, Hector Colon. He wishes he could be with us today, but he sends his greetings. We do have with us Joe Arsbecker, our Chief Operating Officer, and he'll be joining me during our presentation, sharing some of the information with you. I am Sarah Halstead. I'm the Church Relations Liaison, and I've been helping the refugee program the last couple of months in responding to many of the questions that have come up. And I want to acknowledge Mary Flynn. She is our Refugee Resettlement Program Manager, and she certainly has taught me most of what I'll be able to share with you today, but has many years experience working with the program, and we're very excited to share that with all of you. In addition, Sharon Hudy, who is our Director of Communications with Lutheran Social Services, will be helping us with monitoring the chat after we finish here today. So thank you again. So let's go ahead and get started.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Good afternoon, everyone. Joe Arsbecker here from Lutheran Social Services. Really happy to be with you and happy to close out the day, and hopefully we can share some information and do a little learning as well. So as Sarah said, we're going to walk through the ABCs. So we will start with awareness. So really what our goal here is just for you to learn a little bit more about refugees, share some knowledge, and really to equip us all to share, to love, to support as a community the refugees in an effective way. Also, though, learning and awareness and knowledge will help us kind of stop the spread of misinformation and stigma. And I think we all know there is quite a bit of that out there today. So one of the best ways for us to learn is to ask questions. So I'm going to ask a couple questions right now. So the first one, what exactly are refugees? I bet we all have our own definition, and I think if we polled the room, we would probably get many different refugee definitions. So I think sometimes their terms can get mixed up or confused. There's terms like refugee, asylee, immigrants. Sometimes they're used interchangeable, sometimes they're not. You know, and this sometimes can lead to bad feelings about groups of people or people being misunderstood. And really to add to the confusion, in the US, we use the term refugee differently than it tends to be used around the world. So let's try to learn a little bit together about what these terms mean. So here we have kind of a 1, 2, 3 of learning what the terms are. So let's start with immigrants. So as you can see, immigrants, they voluntarily leave their homeland and they're legally resettled into another country. Different from asylees who leave their homeland and request protection or safe haven into a second country. And then thirdly, refugees, they're driven away from their homeland, again, to seek safety into a second country, but ultimately get resettled into a third country. So as I mentioned earlier, the term refugee means something a little bit different in the US than the rest of the world. So in the US, a refugee is someone that has already been admitted to the US. So they've passed multiple screenings. Those screenings include health screenings, include security checks. Now in the rest of the world, though, refugee is often thought of as someone seeking refuge. So we would call those people seeking refuge asylees or asylum seekers. So again, in the US, a refugee is someone who has already received refuge. So they're in the US. And just a note for LSS, our program, we serve both asylees and refugees in our resettlement program. So we'll talk a bit more about what refugee resettlement is. So refugee resettlement started after World War II, kind of as a humanitarian effort between the US and the United Nations. United Nations started to define who refugees are and what refugees are. And the US began to make a commitment to take in refugees each year.
So how exactly does LSS fit into all this? Well, that's a good question, and we're really glad that you asked. So traditionally, refugees flee their country and make their way to a United Nations refugee camp or a refugee center in another country that is safe. And this picture actually shows one such camp in Kenya. Now, the word Kakuma means nowhere. It's not really the name of a city, but it might sum up how someone feels when they're in this kind of a refugee camp. The United Nations conducts interviews to determine eligibility for refugee status and protection. And if given refugee status, then a case can be selected for resettlement in a third country. The International Organization for Migration, or sometimes called IOM, which is a part of the United Nations system, decides which cases go where, and they help to coordinate travel to the final destination countries. Now, refugees don't always have a choice as to where they are settled. The choice that they have is to be able to go when they're able or to stay with an uncertain and sometimes dangerous future. Now, if they are assigned to the United States, they then go through a process to be cleared by us before arrival. The United States Department of State, Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration, also called PRM, works in partnership with 9 voluntary national resettlement agencies. Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service, or LIRS, is one of those 9. And Lutheran Social Services is an affiliate of LIRS, or a local resettlement agency. Resettlement agencies' jobs start at the airport when the refugees arrive. And agencies like LSS don't go out and find refugees. That's not how it works. But typically, before the refugees arrive and come to us, that process has taken anywhere between 18 and 36 months. Now, it is important to know that when the refugees arrive, they have permanent, legal, documented status. So they can rent an apartment, they can get a bus pass, they can sign their kids up for school, they can get a job, etc. They are eligible for benefits and services that any resident of Wisconsin is eligible for, except for voting privileges, which are earned after passing citizenship tests within 5 years.
So the goal of refugee resettlement is self-sufficiency. So refugees are expected to become self-sufficient, not dependent on agencies, not dependent on churches, not dependent on the community. Self-sufficiency means that they're paying their own expenses. They're learning English. They're obeying all the laws, guidelines that we are all expected to obey as citizens of Wisconsin and citizens of the US. So what does LSS do? What are the services that we provide as an organization? So it starts with what we call core services. So this happens in the first 30 to 90 days after a refugee arrives. And this includes things like intensive welcome, community integration, resource connections. There's quite a lot to that. Then beyond that, we provide case management. Case management will last for a year, could be longer if there's some special needs or special cases. Then for the next 5 years, we'll provide ongoing information and referral services. In addition, we also will provide employment programs promoting self-sufficiency. We'll provide cultural orientation, enrollment in English as a second language classes. And then throughout, we always have the ability for appointments with refugees or walk-ins to provide them whatever assistance they may need, whether that's an emergency or just an ongoing. So we have a great example of one refugee who's really using his God-given gifts to serve. Who you see on your screen right now is Omar. So Omar was settled by the LSS Refugee Resettlement Program several years ago. He came from Camp Kakuma that Sarah referenced earlier after he fled Somalia. Today, Omar is a supervisor in our LSS program. Wonderful guy, beautiful smile there.
So the current crisis with Afghanistan presents us with some real immediate and urgent needs. Due to the evacuation of so many individuals so quickly, there's a mix of situations. Now, some of the Afghans are refugees who already were in the process of coming here. Some of those are individuals who worked for the US in the past 20 years, such as maybe assisting with our own military, but now they were facing persecution in Afghanistan. Normally, getting them home would have taken up to 18 months, but in this case, it happened in just weeks. Some of them are not what we would term refugees by definition, but rather those who are seeking asylum. And generally, they would not have qualified for the benefits described earlier, so LSS has been preparing for their greater needs. Many of these folks do not speak English. As soon as they receive employment authorization cards, the LSS refugee resettlement staff will work closely with them to find permanent, stable employment. However, it may take considerable time before they're authorized to work in the US and have the skills needed for employment. Now, normally LSS receives pass-through funding from our National Resettlement Affiliate, LIRS, in the amount of $1,275 for each case. And those dollars must be spent on behalf of the client for shelter and safety needs. So things like housing, food, winter clothing, car seats, utilities, phones. However, at first it seemed like the Afghans who were not technically defined as refugees would not have this funding provided, and it would need to be secured from private donations. Now, due to strong advocacy, legislation was recently introduced on a national level to change this, and we're blessed to announce that as of just a couple weeks ago, this was approved. Afghans will be eligible for benefits such as W-2 for families with children, food share, Badger Care, and refugee cash assistance for up to 8 months. However, because we expect it to take longer for Afghans to become employed, it will take more months than usual to provide the support that they need.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground there in letter A, awareness. So let's move on to B, belonging. So part of what makes our resettlement program really successful is our ability to create a sense of belonging for those new arrivals. I think we can look to Luke chapter 10 and learn our calling for others from the parable of the Good Samaritan. You know, as Christians, we want to help. And boy, we over the past several weeks have seen just an outpouring of support and an outpouring of help. And I just want to say thank you to all of you here who have been part of that. It's just been a wonderful outpouring. So our goal again for resettlement, one of our goals is a permanent home for these individuals. And we want that permanent home to happen as quickly as possible. So that is different than being a temporary guest in someone's house. So typically the way the process works is we pick up a refugee, often from the airport, take them to their own apartment, get them kind of set up with the basic things to get them started, you know, from toiletries to kitchen items, to cleaning supplies, to furniture, to food, culturally appropriate food. And a collection of supplies, that's really a wonderful way for someone to help and for someone to feel belonging. So we do have volunteers in our refugee program, and we always have a need for volunteers. And the volunteers are really a key part that help create that sense of belonging for the refugees. So what can a volunteer do in this program? Well, can be a cultural mentor to the individual, help them acclimate to the US. They can provide transportation to get the refugee where they need to be, help prepare the home before arrival. Volunteers assist us with grocery shopping for the new family. Volunteers can be part of the welcoming group that happens at arrival at the airport. Volunteers can organize and collect the needed items to deliver to the refugee's new home. And there's much more that volunteers can do as well. Those are just a few examples. Now, some of the roles that for volunteers do require background checks. Some require training, some require specific time commitments, but others do not. Some require some proximity to Milwaukee, but not all. Others can be done from a distance. So one really special way to create a sense of belonging is by co-sponsoring a refugee family. So working with the support of the refugee resettlement team, what a co-sponsor does is help with everything from furnishing an apartment to checking in daily with the family, just to ensuring that their needs are met and being a good neighbor to that family. And full co-sponsorship could also include providing financial support to help cover shelter and basic needs until they reach that point of self-sufficiency.
So the last part of the ABCs is C, which stands for community. And this builds on awareness and belonging. And the same way that we support families who are making their new homes in the United States, we also strive to build community in the support system as well. We will learn from one another. What works well for one congregation may benefit another. A challenge that's overcome by one family can help others. And partnership models that truly work will create a stronger sense of community overall. We know that Christ tells us that we are many parts to one body, and we need these diverse experiences and perspectives to allow us all to grow in love. And by recognizing the infinite worth in each part, including those new refugees and asylees, we will certainly experience people using their God-given gifts to serve. Now, LSS has been the grateful recipient of a great amount of outpouring of love and support from so many people across our region since the news of the Afghan evacuation occurred back in August. And we want to send out a big thank you to the Siebert Lutheran Foundation for stepping up in a really big way with a $75,000 matching grant award to LSS for this purpose. We will be announcing shortly how our community and you can help us to meet this match, but please know that starting today, gifts that are provided through our website, which is lsswis.org, will be counted toward the match. So please check that website regularly for updates about program-specific needs and our fundraising progress. So again, as promised, now that we've covered the ABCs, we want to open it up for some Q&A and find out about the questions that you have. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a moment here so I can get back to a few of the maybe faces and names there. And Sharon, if you'd like to take a look at the Q&A and let us know what kind of questions people have.
Sure, thank you. I'm not seeing any questions as of yet. But while we are waiting for folks to maybe think on some things based on the great information that you shared, do we want to talk a little bit about, here's one question. How many of those seeking asylum from Afghanistan will be helped by LSS in Wisconsin?
That is a great question, and thanks for asking. Do you want to tackle that one, Joe, or would you like me to?
I sure can. Yes, so how many of those will be helped in Wisconsin? What I can tell you is what we expect for our program here in Milwaukee. So that we expect that we will serve about 200 refugees, Afghan refugees here in our program in Wisconsin. Now, recognize there are 6 other resettlement agencies across Wisconsin as well. So I don't know exactly what the statistics are for those, but I guess if you could, I'm going to generalize and assume that they might be similar to us. So, if you look at it that way, it's probably 1,000 or 1,200 that come to our state.
I guess I would add to that, too, Joe, that we know that this is going to be a long process. And many people in Wisconsin are hearing a lot about this because of a lot of the focus on Fort McCoy and all the folks that are housed there. And we know that Fort McCoy is the largest of all the camps in the U.S. that have accepted those folks from Afghanistan, and largest by, I think, bigger than the next 2 or 3 combined. So we're hearing a lot about that. Sometimes people think because they're in Fort McCoy, they're going to end up in Wisconsin. That's not necessarily the case. That's one of the centers where they are processing all of those and then resettling across the country to the various agencies that can help with that. So we do know it's going to take a while to get through that number of people that are here in the United States. So this is a process that will take quite a while.
Thank you, Sarah and Joe. And a question did come in Q&A. There's actually 2 in there now. One is a follow-up, though, to the conversation we're having currently, and then I'll ask the next one in Q&A. But other than Milwaukee, are there particular communities where Afghan refugees are being resettled?
So yes, I can take that. So here in Wisconsin, there are a few different agencies, as we mentioned. There is one that works out of the Appleton area. There's one that works out of the Green Bay area. There's one that works out in Madison area, and there's one that is in the Wausau area. So pretty well the state is covered. All are located in the more urban areas, larger populated areas. So that's where, and we have a resettlement range that is within 100 miles of our resettlement base. So for us at LSS, we're here in Milwaukee, 100 miles around Milwaukee. So that gives you a sense of the state is pretty well covered. Yes.
And what I've learned from Mary over the past few weeks as well is that those are those guidelines within 100 miles of a resettlement agency. They do have the ability to make exceptions sometimes on a special request, but what they want to do is make this as successful as possible for the refugees that are resettling. So there are certain things that they want to make sure would be available in that community to help them with that success. One would be, is there available and efficient and affordable housing? Is there a good job market so that they can get a job and become self-sufficient? Is there a community, or can they group a number of Afghans together so that they could have someone that they can talk to in their own language and, things like that. So it's not that it's impossible. And certainly if there are some areas of the state that aren't covered by those 100-mile radius areas, it's not impossible, but it's a special exception, and we want to make sure that we have the right things in place to make it successful for them.
Yeah, I might also add that one of the key criteria for a refugee where to be resettled is if they have some ties, some family ties or some relative ties. So if there's somebody that has a family member or relative in Madison, they're very likely going to be resettled in Madison. That's going to be a first priority.
What I'm going to do now too is put the email for church relations in the chat. And you can send emails to church.relations@lsswis.org, which will go to Sarah. And she can help to also talk through some of those details, because there's a lot of subtle differences for the ways in which people get involved. And speaking of that, Joe or Sarah had said earlier about people, Afghani and refugees, using their God-given gifts to serve. And I just love this question. Here's another person who's using their God-given gifts to serve. We have an urban farm ministry. The vegetables people eat is very much governed by culture. What are culturally relevant vegetables Afghan refugees would find helpful?
That is a great question. I can tell you that I've learned a lot from Mary, who has many years experience working with refugees from all over the world. Lots of different cultures, lots of different religions, lots of different backgrounds. And certainly there's a little bit of a learning curve each time. But we also want to ask them and find out what they're most comfortable with, because one of the things that we have to check ourselves and be very careful about is understanding that these are individuals, and we want to find out what they prefer and what they're most comfortable with. I've sort of shared the example that if something happened here in the United States, let's say something happened and people from the US were all grouped together and sent somewhere else because they were seeking refuge. What if we had a person that was from, a small town in Wisconsin, somebody from Boston, somebody from Kansas, somebody from New Orleans? First of all, we might not be able to understand each other's, accents, let alone agree on what's our typical meal. What do we like to eat? So it's important for us to respect those individual differences and to ask them. That said, there are some food not necessarily restrictions, but customs and things that we have learned, particularly about people from various backgrounds and how the food is prepared, or what kinds of spices they might like, or how an animal is actually prepared for a meal. So we want to respect that and do that in the best way possible. I think for your specific question, we'd probably want to direct to our program staff so we can get the individual answers from the people that we're serving, but also have that background. And we have partnered with a lot of people from various ethnic backgrounds who help us to learn and to do that appropriately along the way. Joe, do you have more you'd like to add to that one?
No, just that I don't know the specific answer to that question either, but I suspect there is someone in our refugee resettlement staff who could give you the answer to that. So if we could get an email and respond,
Yes.
we will certainly do that. Yep.
I did send that email to the person asking the question. For the rest of the group, that would be refugee@lsswis.org. But what we're trying to do is just funnel all questions through church.relations, so that, we're just going through one per person, and then she can funnel that on. So please, yes. And wherever you send an email, we'll get it. So no worries on that. Another question that came up is about co-sponsorship. So how long is the commitment, and what kind of support does LSS provide to the congregation or group for this? So how do we get people started with co-sponsorship?
Thank you so much for asking, because this is really a big need. We really do need the support of co-sponsors, and congregations are a natural fit for this, but any organization or even a group of congregations can help in this way. So typically there's some pretty intensive partnership that lasts at least 6 months, but we want to try to get that family to the point of being self-sufficient. There is a whole bunch of information that we can share, and the best way to do that is to attend an information session about co-sponsoring. We hold those each week now on Tuesday evenings at 6:30. And so anybody who's interested in attending an information session about co-sponsorship, just send me an email at that church.relations@lsswis.org, and we will send you the link to that virtual meeting. It's all virtual. So we'll send you that Zoom link, and you're welcome to join us. Those information sessions are great. They walk you through what the requirement is. There's also some really good information on our website at lsswis.org. That will take you right to a page that talks about refugee resettlement, and in there's a frequently asked questions page. That is golden. There is some great nuggets of information there, including answers about co-sponsorship. So typically we want to be partnering with that family or that individual until they're at that point of being self-sufficient. 6 months is what it usually takes. It might take a little bit longer. It might be a commitment of up to a year. But what most congregations or co-sponsors have found is that if they've had a great experience with one, they're already completing, they're at that point where they're self-sufficient, they're eager to help the next one in line. So if that's been a good experience, they can continue on longer if they would like to do that. So for more information, let me know about the information sessions and we'll send you that link.
Sarah, thank you. I also think it might be a good idea for us to talk about the difference between co-sponsorship and volunteers. Could you just give that difference and then talk about how LSS supports volunteers as well?
Absolutely. So in regard to volunteers and co-sponsors, we're partnering with you in this. So we're with you all the way. You're never going to be by yourself or not having an LSS staff person to help you along the way. Both volunteers and co-sponsors have the opportunity to learn about that experience through an information session. The same way that we talked about the co-sponsor information sessions on Tuesday, we have an individual volunteer information sessions on Thursday. Those begin at 5:30. So we can answer some more questions during that time if you're interested. But individuals who volunteer might help with providing transportation, some of the things that Joe mentioned during the presentation, maybe helping with learning their English and reinforcing that, or providing some respite time for childcare while they're, working on something. There's a lot of different things that people can do. And we're grateful for all the gifts of your time and talent. Sometimes people have a special skill. They may have reached out to me because they're a retired lawyer and they're able to help with legal help. Or maybe they have, some language talent and they might be able to help with some interpretation or something. So send us your ideas about how you might like to volunteer and we'll find a way to make that work and share more information with you as an individual volunteer. Now, co-sponsors are kind of a special group. And within that group, it does contain a volunteering component because co-sponsors sort of walk hand in hand with that family to help them out. So you might have one person from that group who's coming over every week to help with a certain task. And so they learn that group of people, they trusted those folks and they check in with them every day. Hey, how's it going today? What kind of things do you need? What's coming up? And they're able to answer a lot of questions, particularly about culture and, how things work in America. So we kind of go through that in the training after an information session, whether it's for volunteers or whether it's for co-sponsorship. We ask you to complete some forms for us to get some more information. Sometimes that involves some background checks. Once that is done, then there is an orientation for co-sponsors, an orientation for individual volunteers. And we can answer more and provide more information and support during that time. But that support continues through that relationship with the refugees. We're here with you on that.
I will add to that, some folks have been asking if they're an individual, can they join with another co-sponsorship group? And the answer is yes. And if you go to that church.relations@lsswis.org, you can connect with Sarah and she can get you connected with a group. Another question came in. How many Afghan refugees do you think you will be serving in the near future? Let's see, wondering about hosting resources, etc., that we need. Are there any local employers who have stepped up to help with employment? Great questions. So I think I'll start with Sarah and then maybe that'll get turned over to Joe as well.
I was going to say, Joe, if you want to cover the numbers part, I can talk a little bit about the employment part if you'd like.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. So we believe that our expectation is that we will see about 200 Afghan refugees, but that will happen over a lengthy period. We don't know exactly how quickly that'll happen, but this could be over a year-long period or so. So 200 is the number that we would expect that we settle here at LSS.
Thanks, Joe. I want to just add to that a little bit more information. As you heard during our presentation, the first part was kind of about what the general refugee resettlement program is like, and then we kind of talked about what happens with the special Afghan population. Of course, everybody is very attentive and very aware of what's happening with people from Afghanistan because it's been all over the news. Let me back up just a few months in this process, because we had a change in administration in Washington, and it affected our refugee resettlement program. We served fewer people during the last administration than we normally would have. I think there was like 106 or something that we were at the end of 2020, was it? 2020.
Yes.
And 4 years prior, we were serving on an annual basis more than 300. So we knew that we were already going to see an increase in the number of refugees coming to us because we were going back to increasing those numbers. So we were already gearing up for the fact that we really needed to partner with congregations and co-sponsors and really, kind of beef up the efforts to help all the refugees. And then the Afghan crisis happened. And so on top of that, then they said, how many more can you take? We know you're going to be, serving more, but how many more could you do with the Afghan cases? So there's two things going on at once, an increase in the refugees that we're serving and the Afghans. And truly, whether that person came from Afghanistan, and we know all the details about that because we're hearing it in the news, or whether they're fleeing an equally difficult situation in their country because of war or persecution, they're still very deserving of our help and still need our support. So there's lots of opportunity there. And I guess I just wanted to add that to the numbers piece, because that's how many Afghans we think we're going to serve. But we also know we're increasing by a couple hundred or so the regular refugees that we're serving. So there's a huge, huge need. Now, to the question about employers. I have had a number of employers reach out to me. A lot of people are eager to hire. We know there's a market out there for hiring people for jobs. And I've certainly had a lot of people reach out to me. They can certainly email the church.relations@lsswis.org. What we do is we pass that information on to the program staff, because once the individuals have their employment cards and once they have the skills that they need, maybe they need to understand and speak or read a little English before they can work in a job. Maybe that's not as important, or you've got an employer that's willing to work with some folks. Once they get ready, then we connect with those employers and we work on getting them those jobs. So the answer is yes, and you can reach out to us, and there have been local employers that have done so, and we've relayed that information to our team with the Refugee Resettlement Program.
Thank you, Sarah and Joe. I am not seeing other questions in Q&A or chat. I'm just trying to think on some questions that may have come up about co-sponsorship or volunteering.
Let me add one
other question. I think you covered that pretty well.
This is another really common one that people have asked about. So we love the ability to work together with you in very real ways and engage with volunteers and co-sponsorship. A number of congregations and groups and individuals across the area have also supported us with in-kind donations of different things. And sometimes people ask, what do you need? Again, I would refer you to that website because it'll tell you the most current information about what's necessary. But even as we talked about equipping them, giving them that apartment that has all the basics ready there for them, think about what kinds of things you need and what you might be able to take with you in a suitcase if you left in a hurry. You probably don't have pots and pans. You probably don't have cleaning supplies or linens or, those basics that we need every day. So we have the ability to collect what we call kits or groups of supplies. And we're now accepting those. And there's information again on that website about how people can collect them, how we like them packaged, how they can deliver them, how we can get it to the refugees. And that's all there. I would add to that truly one of the biggest needs we do have is for financial support, because there's always something that's not covered there. There's going to be some need that somebody has. And specifically because of the refugees from Afghanistan, maybe needing that kind of support longer, the financial support is so very, very important. And we're grateful for the Siebert Foundation in this matching grant. So that's another way. If there's a collection within your congregation or individuals that want to support us in that way, that's always very, very appreciated. I see another question that came in.
Sarah, I might just add to that you know, one of the biggest needs, of course, is support to fund that permanent housing. And Sarah mentioned earlier the amount of funds that the refugee receives upon resettlement, which is really pretty nominal and basically gets you about 1 month of rent. And so it's really not likely that someone is permanent in a job in 1 month. It takes a little bit of time for them to find employment. So there tends to be a period in there where there's a need for support for housing. So that is one of the greatest financial needs that we see.
Thank you so much, Joe and Sarah. You know, and we talk a lot about basic needs, which is very foundational, but what about the psychological and emotional needs? And a great question came in about what kinds of assistance LSS provides to refugees in terms of addressing the trauma of leaving their country in this way.
That is such a great question. Yeah, Joe, you want to handle that one?
Sure. You know, I think there's several ways that happens. You know, as an organization, we operate in a trauma-informed manner. So our individuals in the refugee resettlement program are skilled in how to interact with the person there, but also we will connect that person with whatever resources appear to be necessary. So, you know, one of our jobs as a resettlement agency is to take care of that individual and that family. So if there are needs that you know, might be behavioral health or mental health needs, or you know, we will link them to the appropriate resources. And in some cases that can be inside LSS as well.
And one of the things I wanted to add to that is that LSS has been resettling refugees for over 40 years. And in that time, we've done this with over 10,000 refugees, and every one of them is escaping a very scary and dangerous situation and has had to leave, you know, their life behind. And there's an enormous amount of trauma involved in that. And so that is something that I think is well built into this particular program. We understand what that's like. We understand how to, you know, give them what they need and to back off so that they have the space to take care of what they do as well. And so I think we're well equipped to help with that, but that's absolutely an important part of how we share, you know, our love and how we support people in that way.
And you know what, I mentioned when I spoke about Omar, who was a refugee and is now working in our program, we have several individuals in our program that were resettled as refugees. So they have the lived experience of going through that trauma and the situation that the people are in. So that's extremely valuable.
Thank you so much for your answers. I am going to go ahead and put all of the contact information in the chat. So I'm going to include our website again, where you can email to get information and get involved. And then also I wanted to just put in there our social media handle, which is at LSSWIS. I would hope that if you are out and active on social media, that you could find LSS. We are right now doing a social media campaign where we're taking one FAQ at a time. And if it's possible for you to like, follow, and share so that we can continue to spread the word and get more and more people involved, that would be fantastic. I see another question came in. Oh, it's a comment. Thank you so much. Thank you for this information and for all of your efforts in helping those seeking asylum refugee. Yes, and thank you for participating and being interested in wanting to help. We so appreciate all of you. I don't see any other questions right now.
There's one more in the Q&A, Sharon. Yeah,
I'm sorry. Thank you so much. Yep, thank you. So do we work with members of the armed services who served in Afghanistan, since they might have a personal connection with the people? Great question. Joe, would you like to take that?
Yes. So I don't specifically know the answer to that, though. I'm not aware that of what the connection is there for individuals that served in the worked in the armed forces that may have worked with some of these individuals. Again, we will try to make the appropriate and the best community connections for all the refugees. Sarah, anything to add?
Yeah, I can tell you that in the responses that we've had over the last couple of months, I have had some people reach out to me. Some people say, I lived in Afghanistan. I served in Afghanistan. I helped with this kind of program before. So again, as people, we're all asking ourselves the same question. We always ask, how can I help? And as we do that, we each identify things that we know of because of the gifts that we've been given and the skills that we have, or the experiences that we have. And we're so grateful for everyone who has reached out in that way. So, so there have been a few individuals that have shared that kind of background with us and are interested. You know, this is near and dear to my heart. I'm a refugee or was a refugee, and I'm doing this now, or I served in this way, and I know what it's like for people. I want to help. So a lot of times there is some involvement, and there may be individuals within your own congregation or your own community who fit that kind of description as well, who might find this very near and dear to their heart. So yeah, I just wanted to say again, we could not do this without people like you. We definitely need the support of the larger community, and our success in being able to support and help and resettle all these refugees happens because of people like you who are on the call, and your interest in helping, your prayers, your support, you know, continuing to ask questions and continuing to share with other people what you've learned, because you may have learned something in this ABCs of refugee resettlement, and it might have surprised you, and you might be able to share with somebody else, and that will help us all to be able to reduce that stigma and to increase the opportunity for many people to be involved and to help. Sometimes, you know, we can't all do it by ourselves, but you know somebody who knows somebody, or you've got a connection with someone, and all of those things are tremendously helpful.
Well, and on behalf of the Siebert Lutheran Foundation team, I want to say thank you to Sarah, Joe, and Sharon for being with us today for our reception. So much great information. It was a pleasure having you, such a blessing, and having those resources to reach out to you and your team if people want to get more involved is really helpful. So thank you again. In like our other sessions, even though this one was structured a little differently, we did record it. And so we'll be able to share this with more people, those that weren't able to attend, or if people want to go back and recap, or even what a great resource to share with your congregation or your Bible study group or an adult education hour at your church. So hopefully it can teach many more people beyond just who joined us today. So thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thanks
Much appreciated. And for those of you who are still on, we will resume the conference tomorrow morning. We have our first session starting at 8:30 a.m. So we will see you bright and early, and we hope you're able to join us. And there's also a chat area on the conference website if anyone wants to engage with other attendees tonight or anytime tomorrow. That will be open past the conference. So there's opportunities to ask other attendees what they learned, share insights and experiences with those participating in the Inspired to Thrive conference these last 2 days. So thank you again, and we'll see everyone tomorrow morning. Have a great night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.